Hi, you're on the Reddit Confessions channel. The laugh came from across the room. Sharp, smug, and just loud enough to slice through the music. He was already telling the story. I hadn't even taken off my coat yet. "There he is!" someone called out, and heads turned toward me, just in time for him to finish his punchline. I didn't hear the whole thing, but I didn't need to. The way the room reacted, that awful mixture of polite chuckles and pity glances, yeah, I knew I was the punchline. The office party was already in full swing. Music bounced off glass walls. People wore their ambition like jewelry. My wife, Sienna, was nowhere in sight, and my name tag was still dangling from my wrist, untouched. That's when I saw him. The same guy I didn't recognize from photos, but had heard way too much about during those funny stories Sienna told after work. Oh, Darian did the most ridiculous thing today. Or, Darian says the wildest stuff during lunch. Darian. And tonight, Darian decided I was his personal entertainment. He raised his glass in my direction like I was some kind of stage act finally arriving late. There he is, the man, the myth, the IT wizard. He dragged out the last two words, making them sound like I wore a cape made of printer cables. A few people laughed. I didn't. I stood frozen, still gripping the gift bag I brought, filled with snacks no one asked for and wine no one would drink. And then he walked up. Darian. Tall. Perfectly groomed. Wearing that kind of smirk that made you feel like he was already halfway through mocking you before you even spoke. "I was just telling them," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder like we were old friends. "How you once tried to fix Sienna's laptop by turning it upside down and shaking it." There was no such story, and Sienna knew it. She heard him. I saw her across the room, holding a drink, trying to look unbothered. She didn't step in. She never did. And that night, something in me, the version of me that always shrugged it off, always stayed silent, always laughed to make everyone else comfortable, started to rot. He had no idea, not yet. But I was about to do something no one expected. Not him, not Sienna, and definitely not me. I didn't move for a while after Darian walked away, still hearing his fake story echoing around the room like a stain I couldn't scrub off. People were laughing, some out of politeness, others out of habit. But not one person looked surprised. That was the part that stuck in my chest like a shard of glass. They weren't shocked, like they expected me to be the joke, like that was just my role tonight. I finally peeled off my coat and dropped the untouched gift bag on a side table. It already looked out of place, too thoughtful, too humble, just like me. I made my way to the back of the gallery where fewer people mingled, pretending to admire the abstract sculptures mounted on frosted glass stands. I wasn't actually looking at them. I just needed to breathe. I stared at one piece for too long. It was just a slab of twisted steel with a plaque that read, "Corporate Dissonance." The irony almost made me laugh. I looked at my reflection in the polished metal and barely recognized myself. My tie was crooked, my shirt was bunched at the back from sitting in the car, and my eyes, they looked small, dull. Like I'd forgotten how to show up for myself. I heard footsteps behind me. I expected Sienna. I was wrong. "Hey, you good?" The voice was unfamiliar, but the tone was different. Not mocking, not sharp, just curious. I turned to see a woman I hadn't met before. Dark red lipstick, blazer over a velvet dress, holding a tiny plate of shrimp and something I didn't recognize. "Sorry," I muttered, trying to force a smile. Just needed a second to regroup. She nodded, scanning the room over my shoulder. "Darian, right?" Her voice dropped, slightly conspiratorial. "He's a lot." I gave a weak laugh, one I didn't have to fake this time. "You could say that." "I'm Quinn," she said, holding out a hand. "I'm in vendor partnerships. Don't worry, I'm not a fan of the frat boy comedy hour either." Her honesty startled me. It wasn't like the forced politeness I'd grown used to at these things. She didn't try to offer me a lifeline. She just tossed one and walked away, like she didn't expect me to grab it. And maybe that was why I wanted to. Before I could say anything more, a loud voice near the center of the room interrupted everything. "Ladies and gentlemen, quick announcement before we bring out the custom cocktails." Darian again. He stood on a bench, glass raised high, commanding attention like he owned it. He was telling another story, this time about a mystery guest who supposedly once confused a wireless charger for a coaster. He glanced directly at me when he said it. The crowd roared. I looked over at Sienna. She was smiling, not laughing, not participating, but smiling, like someone tolerating a circus act. And right then, something inside me, that brittle shell of patience I'd built over the years, cracked. I didn't storm out. I didn't yell. But I did start walking, not toward the exit, but straight toward Dorian. Because if he wanted everyone's attention tonight, he was going to get it, but not the way he planned. I didn't even feel the ground under my shoes as I walked. Every sound around me turned muffled, like the room had been dipped underwater. The music faded, the glasses clinking became a distant rattle, and all I could hear was Darian's voice, theatrical, overconfident, chewing the air like he owned it. For a guy who supposedly hated the spotlight, he sure loved climbing on things to make announcements. As I approached, a few people turned their heads, expecting maybe another joke, maybe something awkward. They probably thought I was coming to laugh it off, to do what I always did, play the quiet guy, act like nothing bothered me, smile with my shoulders hunched and my voice barely audible. But not this time. I stopped a few feet in front of him and waited until he noticed. He paused mid-sentence, blinking like I'd short-circuited his script. His smirk faltered for half a breath. That was all I needed. "You've got a great memory, Dorian," I said, just loud enough for people nearby to hear. "It's amazing how much you remember about things that never happened." That alone drew a few heads. He chuckled, trying to keep control of the moment. "Hey, it's all in good fun, Hallie." "It's Halden," I corrected him calmly. "And you've been calling me that all night, so either you're hard of hearing or you're just a—" I stopped myself. This wasn't about name-calling. I wouldn't sink to his level, not here. The circle around us began to grow. I could feel the room's attention shifting like a tide. Sienna appeared near the back, watching now. No smile. "I just wanted to say," I continued, "it takes a special kind of guy to humiliate someone he just met. You're clearly very special." A few nervous chuckles. Darian was still on his bench, but he looked smaller now, like someone who had suddenly realized the spotlight wasn't warm, it was scorching. "I work in non-profit IT, I said, turning to the group. "It's not glamorous. I'm not going to show up in a $3,000 blazer, but I help people, kids mostly, access basic education tools. Last week I fixed a whole computer lab with $40, duct tape, and a YouTube tutorial. I don't say that to brag. I say it because I like who I am. Even if this guy," I nodded toward Dorian, "thinks that's funny." Silence, just for a moment. And then Quinn, the woman I'd met earlier, clapped once, slowly but purposefully. Others followed, not everyone, not loudly, but enough. Enough to make Darian step down without saying another word. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't even feel brave. What I felt was clarity. For the first time in years, I saw myself not through the lens of other people's condescension, but through my own quiet resilience. But as I turned to walk away, I caught Sienna's expression. She wasn't proud. She looked irritated, like I'd ruined something. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about Dorian. This was about something much bigger, something that had been building for years, unnoticed, like a crack beneath wallpaper. And it was about to split everything open. The clapping stopped, the room relaxed, and someone somewhere turned the music back up, like they were trying to seal the moment away. People went back to their conversations, drinks clinked again, and the gallery lights seemed suddenly too bright. But for me, the atmosphere didn't return to normal, because normal was gone now. I walked off toward the hallway near the restrooms, not because I needed to be alone, but because I needed to not be watched. My palms were still sweating. My heartbeat was uneven, the kind of rhythm that makes you feel like you're walking across a rope instead of a floor. I'd never done something like that in my life. And even though I hadn't shouted, hadn't caused a scene, I felt exposed, like I'd just walked across the stage in a bathrobe. I expected her to come after me. I expected Sienna to say something, maybe, "You okay?" or "That was a bit much," or even, "Thanks for standing up for yourself." Anything, but she didn't. I stood there alone in the hallway, surrounded by framed abstract paintings and a coat rack leaning awkwardly in the corner. A few minutes passed before I peeked back into the main gallery. She was still there, not looking for me, not searching, just standing beside Darian, talking, not arguing, not lecturing, not telling him he was out of line. Just talking. She leaned in close at one point, touched his arm when she laughed. My stomach turned so hard I had to look away. It was like watching someone press play on a recording of your worst thoughts. All the things I'd been denying for months. How often she smiled at her phone when it buzzed. How distant she'd become at home. How every conversation lately felt like I was interviewing for a job I already lost. All of it suddenly clicked into place. And not in a dramatic, cinematic way. It was quieter than that. Duller. Like realizing a song you once loved has been playing out of tune for a long time, but you only just noticed. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something inside me was whispering truths I didn't want to hear. I stepped back into the gallery like a ghost, unsure where to go. That's when Quinn spotted me again. She gave me a strange look, not pity, not surprise, something closer to recognition. "You okay?" she asked gently. She must have seen the way I was looking at them. I nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just tired." That's all. She paused. "You know, Sienna and Darian have a bit of a reputation at work." That froze me. "Reputation?" She tilted her head. "I probably shouldn't say more. Office gossip isn't my thing, but it's not hard to notice patterns when people don't bother hiding them anymore." I didn't ask her to explain. I didn't have to. My worst suspicion had already started to bloom in full color, and Quinn's vague honesty only added clarity to it. I turned back to look at my wife, and I caught her mid-smile, mid-touch on Dorian's wrist. She laughed at something he whispered and leaned in just a little too close. That's when she saw me, not from across the room, not like a movie scene. Number. She saw me because I walked right up to her, not with anger, not with confrontation, just calm clarity. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the envelope I hadn't planned to give her until we got home, her Christmas gift, a handwritten letter, and 2 tickets to a retreat in Vermont. Something quiet for us to reconnect. I handed it to her. She took it with hesitation, like it might be something else. And I said 5 simple words. "I don't think you'll need it." Her smile faltered. Dorian blinked, and I turned and walked out. Through the same door I entered feeling like a stranger. Only now, I didn't feel invisible. I felt done. The cold air outside didn't sting the way I thought it would. It felt sharp, sure, but oddly soothing, like I was finally breathing something real after hours of pretending everything was fine inside that gallery. I stood just outside the glass doors, watching reflections shift across the windows. Music still pulsed behind them. Laughter floated out in faint bursts every time someone came in or out. And I kept waiting for her. But she never came. No footsteps rushing behind me, no voice calling out my name, no text asking, "Where are you?" Just silence, and then more silence, until eventually the worst kind of sound broke through. Hers. Sienna's laugh, not muffled, not distant. Right behind the glass. I turned, and through the tall window panes, I saw her, still standing beside Darian, still smiling like I hadn't just handed her a loaded truth and walked away. She wasn't crying. She wasn't chasing. She was pouring him another drink. That was the first time I felt my legs start to shake. Not from rage, not even sadness, from the sheer absurdity of it. I thought about going back in, confronting them, demanding answers. But what would be the point? I already had all the answers I needed. Her silence was louder than anything she could have said. I walked to the curb and opened my rideshare app, but my hand was trembling too much to hit request, and I sat down on a concrete bench and just stared at the streetlights until Quinn walked out a few minutes later, heels clicking against the sidewalk, coat barely thrown over her shoulders. She didn't see me at first. She was on her phone, texting someone with a furrowed brow and a half scowl. Then she noticed me. "You okay?" she asked again, the same question from before, but this time her voice was lower, tired, more certain of the answer. I nodded. It was a lie. She sat down beside me anyway. "I didn't mean to stir anything earlier. Sometimes I speak too plainly." "No," I said. "You didn't say anything I hadn't already felt. You just said it out loud." She looked over at the gallery. "He's been like that for years. Darian. Thinks charm gives him a hall pass. People laugh. They always laugh. But not everyone forgets what they saw." "You think something happened between them?" I asked quietly. Quinn didn't look at me. She just said, "I don't think you'd be asking if you didn't already know." That broke me in a new kind of way, because I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself until now. I had known. Maybe not the full truth, maybe not the details, but I'd known something was slipping. That look in her eyes lately wasn't stress. It wasn't burnout. It was detachment, disinterest, something colder than distance. I sat in that silence for a while until Quinn stood up, brushed her dress down, and said, "If you ever want someone to talk to who won't sugarcoat things, I exist." She handed me a business card, her real one, not the cheap printed ones they pass out at events. It had her personal email on the back, handwritten. And then she left. No big moment, no lingering glances, just one human being recognizing another who'd been torn open in slow motion. I finally got into a car and left without saying goodbye to anyone. And when I got home, I didn't cry. I didn't throw things. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the holiday centerpiece Sienna had put out last week. Red candles, silver ribbon, everything perfectly arranged as if symmetry could disguise emptiness. And right then, I heard the front door unlock. She was home. The door closed gently behind her. No slam, no drama. Just the soft click of someone coming home from a perfectly ordinary evening. She set her keys down in the ceramic bowl near the entryway, took off her coat like she hadn't noticed the silence hanging in the air like smoke. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I sat at the kitchen table, elbows on the edge, hands loosely clasped like I was waiting to be called on in class. She finally looked up and saw me. For the briefest second, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or regret. But just as quickly, it was gone. "You didn't wait for me," she said lightly, walking into the kitchen and opening the fridge. No, "Hey, no, are you all right?" Not even a "thanks for coming." Just that one sentence, spoken with casual disappointment. "You didn't follow me," I replied. That made her pause. She kept her hand on the refrigerator door for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then she pulled out a bottle of water and closed it again, her back still facing me. "I figured you needed space." "No, you figured I wouldn't make a scene." She turned, leaned against the counter, bottle still sealed in her hand. Her face was unreadable, cool, practiced. But her fingers kept turning the bottle cap back and forth, like they needed something to do. "You embarrassed me," she said suddenly. I blinked. "I embarrassed you? You called someone out in the middle of my company's biggest event. Do you know how that makes me look?" I laughed, but it was bitter. Like someone married to a man who's finally tired of being the joke in every room. She rolled her eyes. "Darian was just playing around. That's how he is with everyone." "No," I said, leaning forward. "That's how he is with people he doesn't respect. And you stood there and let him do it to me." She didn't respond. She just looked away, and the silence between us swelled. "You weren't going to stop him," I continued. "You weren't going to defend me, because it's easier for you to pretend I'm harmless and small. That way, you don't have to feel guilty." Her expression cracked just slightly, like I'd struck a nerve she didn't know was exposed. "I don't know what you're talking about," she muttered. "Don't do that." My voice stayed calm, but it didn't shake this time. "Don't pretend you didn't see me standing there. Don't pretend you didn't choose to ignore it. You wanted me to disappear so you could keep floating around him like it was all harmless fun. But it's not harmless, Sienna." And we both know that she didn't argue. She didn't deny it. She just said, "You always overthink everything. You build stories in your head and treat them like facts." I stood up. "Then tell me the real story." She froze. The bottle in her hand finally cracked open with a soft hiss, and she took a long sip like she was buying time. But when she looked at me again, her mouth opened and then closed. That silence was all the answer I needed. I nodded once, slowly. "You don't have to explain," I said, softer now. "I think I knew long before tonight. I just didn't want to believe it." Sienna didn't stop me as I walked toward the bedroom. She didn't ask where I was going or what I was thinking. She stayed right there, in the kitchen, with her unopened excuses and her freshly chilled water. I shut the door behind me and locked it, not out of anger, but finality. For the first time in a long time, I needed to be alone with the truth. But what I didn't know yet was that the truth was about to show up in a way I never saw coming. I couldn't sleep, not because of noise, but because of the silence. the kind that buzzes in your ears when your thoughts are too loud. I laid on the far edge of the bed, fully dressed, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of what my life had become. There was no yelling, no fighting, no shattered plates. Just the cold drift between two people who used to talk about everything, and now couldn't even look each other in the eye. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I heard the faint buzz from her side of the bed. Her phone lit up, once, then again, then again. 3 messages, one right after the other. I stayed still, pretending to sleep. I wasn't trying to catch her. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. But I couldn't stop myself from listening. She didn't check it right away. Maybe she thought I was still awake. Maybe she was hesitating. But after a minute, I felt the bed shift and the faint glow of her screen light up the room like a guilty halo. She didn't whisper. She didn't get up and sneak out. She just typed, fast and low, thumbs tapping like Morse code. Then, a minute later, I heard it, a voice note playing quietly. I couldn't hear the words, but I heard the tone. Deep, confident, male. Her reply came quickly, too quickly. A soft giggle escaped her, followed by a sigh, like she'd forgotten I was right there beside her. That was it. I got up, quietly, deliberately, and walked out of the room. She didn't stop me. She didn't ask where I was going. I wasn't trying to make a scene. I just needed to step out of that house before I started tearing at my own skin. Downstairs, I sat on the couch in the dark and opened my laptop. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for until my cursor hovered over the folder named Shared Finances. Not exactly thrilling, but I clicked it. I started browsing through statements, transactions, travel charges, and that's when I saw it. A hotel booking, 2 months ago. Under her name, but billed to our joint card. It wasn't a business expense. It wasn't during a conference. It was a weekend I distinctly remember, because I was out of town visiting my mom after her surgery. Sienna had insisted she couldn't come. Too much going on at work, she'd said. Too much to juggle. Only now I was seeing what she'd really been juggling. I kept digging. Messages between her and Darian. She hadn't deleted them from her cloud. Maybe she thought I'd never bother checking. But there they were. Lunches that went longer than lunch. Next time, bring that wine again. Can't stop thinking about Friday. Don't worry, he doesn't suspect a thing. They weren't even trying to be clever. The pain didn't hit me in a dramatic wave. It settled slowly, like cold spreading through the floorboards. Not rage, not betrayal. Something worse. Confirmation. That I'd been right all along. That my instincts weren't paranoia. That the man who made jokes about me to a room full of strangers had also been laughing behind closed doors, with my wife. I wanted to confront her right then, throw the laptop down in front of her, and demand she admit it, but I didn't. I closed it, placed it gently on the table, and sat back against the couch. I wasn't ready for a war. I was still mourning the quiet death of something I once believed in. And then, as if summoned by the weight of my silence, Sienna appeared at the top of the stairs. She stood there, barefoot, holding her phone. Our eyes met. She knew. I knew. And for the first time since all of this began, she looked afraid. Not of me, of what I now knew. She didn't say anything, not right away. We just stared at each other across the living room, like two strangers standing on the ruins of something they once swore would last forever. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw accusations. I didn't need to. The truth sat between us, heavy and undeniable. Sienna opened her mouth to speak, but I lifted a hand. Not to silence her, just to stop the cycle we always fell into. Excuses, half-truths, long-winded justifications that never healed anything. I saw everything, I said. The messages, the hotel, the way you looked at him. I've known for a while. Tonight just confirmed it. She stepped down the stairs, slower than usual, like she was walking through a memory she didn't want to reach the end of. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, she whispered. I let out a soft laugh, not cruel, just tired. It always means something. She sat on the edge of the couch, not too close. What do you want to do? That question echoed in my head longer than it should have, because for the first time in years, I had no obligation to protect anyone else's feelings but my own. And that felt like freedom. I already booked a place, I said calmly. A cabin outside the city, just for a few weeks. I need space. I need to think. But I don't think there's anything here worth fixing anymore. Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. I think she knew it too. We weren't angry. We were just finished. I didn't pack much, just a small duffel bag and my laptop. Before I walked out, I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter. She didn't touch it. She just stared at it like it was a relic from a life we both outgrew. I drove for hours. The cabin was quiet, surrounded by trees and early snow. No pings, no events, no loud mouths and tailored suits. Just me, a fire, and the slow, steady process of reclaiming my identity. And strangely, I didn't feel broken. I felt light. Sometimes healing isn't about revenge or dramatic closure. Sometimes it's just about knowing when to stop fighting for someone who stopped choosing you a long time ago. Quinn emailed me a few days later, just a short note that read, "Hope you're somewhere peaceful." I replied with a photo of the snowy woods outside the cabin window. Just that, no words needed.